The rifle shot cracked through the Arizona desert, and Cordelia Whitmore dropped to her knees behind the overturned wagon, her swollen belly making every movement awkward. The Apache raiders had struck their supply train at dawn, and now she was the only one left breathing among the scattered goods and bodies of the trading party. "Please," she whispered to the burning sky. One hand pressed against her 8-month belly where the baby kicked frantically, as if sensing the danger. The metallic taste of fear filled her mouth as hoofbeats thundered closer. A shadow fell across her hiding place. She looked up to see a tall Apache warrior astride a paint horse, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Unlike the others who had attacked the wagon train, this one wore no war paint. Instead of raising his lance, he dismounted with fluid grace. "You carry life," he said in accented English, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "Why do you travel? Alone through Chiricahua lands?" Cordelia's hand instinctively moved to the small pouch around her neck containing her wedding ring, the only proof that she had once been married to the man who abandoned her when he learned of her condition. I was traveling to California to start over." The warrior, she guessed him to be in his 30s, with strong features and hair that caught the morning light like polished obsidian, crouched down to her level. The others wanted to leave no witnesses. I convinced them you pose no threat. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. His eyes flickered to her belly, then back to her face. "Because you remind me of someone I failed to protect." He stood, extending his hand. "I am Ayanaka. It means he who laughs, though I have not laughed in many seasons." Against every instinct screaming at her to flee, Cordelia found herself taking his hand. His skin was warm, calloused from years of handling weapons and horses. "Cordelia," she managed. "The baby comes soon," he observed, helping her to her feet with surprising gentleness. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The trading party had been her last hope. She had spent the last of her money on passage west, away from the shame and whispers of the Colorado mining town where everyone knew her story. "My people's camp is half a day's ride north," Ayanaka sighed, scanning the horizon. "You cannot survive alone in the desert, especially ... quotes he gestured to her condition. "You would take me to your people? A white woman?" Something painful flashed across his features. "My wife was white. She died in childbirth 2 winters past, along with our son. The medicine woman said the child would have brought great joy to our clan." He paused, studying Cordelia's face. "Perhaps the spirits have sent you for a reason." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, making Cordelia gasp and double over slightly. Ayanaka steadied her, his touch respectful but firm. "The choice is yours, Cordelia. Who carries life? Come with me and live, or stay here and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Looking around at the desolate landscape, the vultures already circling overhead, Cordelia realized she had no choice at all. The Apache camp materialized from the desert landscape like something from a fever dream. Cordelia had spent the past 6 hours clinging to Ayanaki's horse, her body pressed against his back, feeling each of his measured breaths as they rode through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate. Now, as wickiups dotted the valley before them and dozens of dark eyes turned their way, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "They stare because they have never seen a white woman heavy with child seeking sanctuary," Ayanaka said, softly, helping her dismount. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, steadying her as her legs threatened to buckle. "But Naeli will care for you." An elderly woman emerged from the largest wickiup, her silver-streaked hair braided with colorful beads, her weathered face creased with what Cordelia hoped was curiosity rather than hostility. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice rising and falling like music. Ayanaka responded, and Cordelia caught her own name in the exchange. She says the baby will come before the next full moon, Nayeli announced in English, circling Cordelia like a hawk studying prey. She says you have no husband. Cordelia's cheeks burned. That's true. Good, the medicine woman said briskly. Useless men only get in the way during birthing. She gestured toward a smaller wickiup. You will stay there. I have prepared it for... She glanced at Ayanaka, something unspoken passing between them, for when the time comes. As the days passed, Cordelia found herself settling into the rhythm of Apache life with surprising ease. The women taught her to weave baskets and prepare traditional foods, their initial wariness melting away as they witnessed her willingness to work despite her condition. Children ran between the wickiups, their laughter filling the desert air, and she often caught herself imagining her own child playing among them, but it was Ayanaka who occupied her thoughts most. Each evening, he would appear at her dwelling with small gifts, a smooth stone worn by the river, wildflowers that bloomed only in hidden canyon walls, a piece of worked leather soft enough for baby clothes. They would sit together in companionable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in impossible colors. "Why do you do this?" she asked one evening as he presented her with a tiny pair of moccasins he had crafted himself. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "Mariposa, my wife, she used to speak of the children we would have. Boys who would hunt beside their father, girls who would learn the old ways from their grandmother." He stared into the fire. "When she died, I thought those dreams died with her." Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not her, Ayanaka." "No," he agreed, turning to look at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are not. You are stronger. You chose to survive when others would have surrendered to despair." The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to his voice. Without thinking, she caught his hand and placed it against her belly. They both froze at the contact, the intimacy of the moment stretching between them like a taut bowstring. "He knows your voice," she whispered. "How do you know?" "It is a boy?" "I don't. I just ... She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Ayanaki's hand remained pressed against her belly, his palm warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "In my vision quest, long before I met you, I saw a sun with eyes the color of summer sky. I thought, the vision false when Mariposa died." He met her gaze. "Perhaps the spirits see further than we do." The first labor pain struck Cordelia during the pre-dawn darkness, doubling her over as she attempted to kindle the fire. She bit back a cry, one hand pressed against the wickiup support pole, the other cradling her belly as the contraction rippled through her body like lightning. "Nayeli," she whispered into the darkness, but her voice was too weak to carry. The pain subsided, leaving her gasping. She had perhaps minutes before the next one hit, moving as quickly as her unwieldy body allowed. She made her way to the entrance and called out louder, "Nayeli." Within moments, the medicine woman appeared, her keen eyes taking in Cordelia's condition at a glance. She barked orders in Apache, and suddenly the camp came alive with activity. Women appeared with baskets of herbs and clean cloths, while others shooed away curious children and men alike, all except Ayanaka, who stood at the wickiup's entrance like a sentinel. "You cannot be here," Nayeli told him firmly. "This is women's work." "She is alone," he replied, his jaw set with determination. "She has no mother, no sister, no husband to wait for news. I will not let her face this without." Another contraction hit, stronger than the first, and Cordelia's knees buckled. Ayanaka was beside her instantly, his strong arms supporting her weight as she rode out the wave of pain. "The baby," she gasped against his shoulder. "Something's wrong." It's too early. He murmured, his voice steady despite the worry she could see in his dark eyes. Nayeli has delivered more children than there are stars in the sky. You will be well. The child will be well. But as the hours wore on and the contractions grew stronger and closer together, Cordelia began to doubt his reassurances. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, not just physical, but soul deep, as if her very essence was being torn apart and rebuilt with each wave. I can't, she whispered during a brief respite, her hair plastered to her skull with sweat. I can't do this. Nayeli appeared with a bitter-smelling tea. Drink. It will help with the pain. Will it help with the fear? Cordelia asked, accepting the cup with shaking hands. The old woman's expression softened. Only courage can help with that. And you have more courage than most, child. You have already survived more than many women. Twice your age. Through the entrance flap, Cordelia could see Ayanaka pacing like a caged wolf, his usual calm composure cracked. Several times he tried to enter, only to be firmly turned away by the attending women. But she could hear him speaking in low tones just outside, his voice a constant comforting presence. He speaks to the spirits, Nayeli explained, noticing Cordelia's attention. He asks for protection for both you and the child. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why does he care so much? Nayeli's weathered hands stilled in their work of preparing another herbal remedy. Because he has claimed you both, whether you know it or not. In his heart, you are already his wife, and that child already carries his name. Before Cordelia could process this revelation fully, the strongest contraction yet seized her, and she cried out despite her efforts to remain quiet. This time, nothing could keep Ayanaka away. He pushed past the protesting women and knelt beside the birthing mat, taking her hand in his. I am here, he said simply. You are not alone. And somehow, with his strength flowing into her through their joined hands, Cordelia found the courage to push through the final moments of labor. The baby emerged with a lusty cry that echoed through the wickiup, announcing his arrival to the world with unmistakable determination. A son, Nayeli announced, lifting the squirming infant for all to see. Strong and healthy, with good lungs. Through tears of exhaustion and relief, Cordelia saw that the child did indeed have eyes the color of a summer sky, just as Ayanaka had foreseen in his vision. Takota, friend to everyone as Ayanaka had named him, was 3 weeks old when the soldiers came. Cordelia was sitting outside her wickiup, nursing the baby in the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree when the thunder of hoofbeats echoed across the desert floor. A patrol of cavalry soldiers crested the ridge, their brass buttons glinting in the harsh afternoon sun, led by a lieutenant whose pale eyes swept the Apache camp with undisguised contempt. Stay calm, Ayanaka murmured, appearing beside her, with the silent grace that had once terrified her and now brought comfort. His hand rested on the knife at his belt, but his posture remained deceptively relaxed. Let me speak for you. The lieutenant dismounted, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he approached. Behind him, a dozen soldiers remained mounted, their rifles ready but not yet aimed. The message was clear. They came in force, but not necessarily for war. You're harboring a white woman, the lieutenant announced without preamble, his gaze finding Cordelia despite Ayanaki's attempt to shield her. Mrs. Cordelia Whitmore. She's wanted for questioning in connection with an attack on a trading post. Cordelia's blood ran cold. She shifted Takota to her shoulder, patting his back as he fussed, disturbed by the tension in the air. There must be some mistake, she said, rising carefully. I never attacked anyone. The lieutenant's smile was thin and humorless. Maybe not. But you were traveling with Jake Morrison's crew when they hit that Apache settlement 6 months back. Killed women and children while the men were out hunting. His eyes narrowed. Funny thing is, you disappeared right after. Some might think you got cold feet. That's a lie, Cordelia breathed, but even as she said it, memory stirred. Jake Morrison, the rough-spoken trader who had offered her passage west. His men, who had looked at her with hungry eyes and made crude comments when they thought she couldn't hear. The unexplained stops, the whispered conversations that ceased whenever she approached. Ayanaka stepped forward, his entire body radiating controlled violence. You call her murderer of children while she holds her own infant son? Apache bastard, you mean? One of the soldiers called out, earning chuckles from his companions. The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Ayanaki's voice cut through the desert air like a blade. When he spoke, it was in perfect, unaccented English that made the soldiers shift uncomfortably in their saddles. That child is my son by blood and by choice. His mother is my wife by Apache law and custom. If you question his legitimacy, you question my honor, his dark eyes fixed on the lieutenant. And I have killed men for far less. The lieutenant's hand moved to his sidearm, but Cordelia stepped between them. Dakota clutched protectively against her chest. Please, she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. There's no need for violence. Then you'll come with us peacefully, the lieutenant said. You can tell your story to the territorial judge. She goes nowhere without. Me, Ayanaka declared. By your own white man's law, a husband cannot be separated from his wife. Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs. They weren't truly married, not by white standards anyway. But as she looked into Ayanaki's eyes, she saw the depth of his commitment, the fierce protectiveness that had led him to claim both her and Dakota as his own. You'd marry an Apache? The lieutenant asked, genuine surprise coloring his voice. Before she could lose her nerve, Cordelia lifted her chin and met his gaze squarely. I already have. The words hung in the desert air like smoke from a signal. Fire. Around them, the Apache camp had gone eerily quiet, every man, woman, and child watching the confrontation unfold. Even baby Dakota seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, his tiny fist curled around a strand of his mother's hair. The lieutenant studied them both for a long moment, his pale eyes calculating. Finally, he shook his head. This isn't over. The territorial government doesn't recognize Apache marriages. We'll be back with proper warrants. As the soldiers wheeled their horses around and rode back toward the ridge, Cordelia sagged with relief. But Ayanaki's expression remained grim. They will return, he said quietly. And next time, they will come with more men and less patience. 3. Days later, as the first stars appeared in the desert sky, Ayanaka found Cordelia sitting by the river that wound through the canyon below their camp. Dakota slept peacefully in her arms, his tiny features relaxed in the moonlight, blissfully, unaware of the danger closing around them. The scouts have returned, he said, settling beside her on the smooth river rock. The soldiers are camped 2 days' ride south, waiting for reinforcements from Fort Apache. Cordelia didn't look up from her son's face. How many? 50 men. Maybe more. His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the weight of responsibility in it. They are not coming to talk. The implications hung between them like storm clouds. The Apache camp held perhaps 30 warriors, but they also had women, children, and elders to protect. A direct confrontation would be suicide. There's something else, Ayanaka continued, his tone growing even more grave. I sent word to other bands asking what they knew of Jake Morrison and his men. He paused, choosing his words carefully. They were gun runners, Cordelia. They sold weapons to Apache war parties in exchange for stolen cattle and horses, then sold information about those same war parties to the cavalry. Playing both sides, she whispered, finally understanding. And when that Apache settlement, Was attacked? Morrison had provided the soldiers with details about when the warriors would be away hunting. It was not chance that they struck when only women and children remained. His jaw tightened. 3 of those children were my sisters. Grandchildren. The full horror of it washed over her. She had been traveling with murderers, had unknowingly been part of their operation. Dear God, what have I done? You have done nothing but survive, Ayanaka said firmly. Morrison used you as cover, a pregnant woman traveling westward. Draw no suspicion, but you were never part of his crimes. The soldiers don't see it that way. No, they see only a white woman living among Apache, and it threatens everything they believe about their superiority. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the river's gentle murmur. There is a way to keep you and Dakota safe, but you will not like it. She finally looked at him, seeing the pain in his dark eyes. Tell me. I will take you to the mission at San Carlos. Father Miguel has influence with the territorial government. He could arrange safe passage for you to California, perhaps even help clear your name. The words seemed to cost him physically. You would be safe there. And you? I stay with my people. We will move deeper into the mountains, find places the cavalry cannot follow. Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes. After everything they had been through, after the bond that had formed between them during Dakota's birth and the weeks that followed, he was willing to let her go to keep her safe. What if I don't want to go? She asked quietly. Ayanaka went very still. What do you mean? She shifted Dakota to one arm and reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. What if I want to stay with you? What? If I choose to be your wife not just in name, but in truth? Cordelia. His voice was rough with emotion. You do not understand what you are saying. To stay means to live as a fugitive, always running, always hiding. It means your son will grow up Apache with all the hardships that brings. It means. Our son will grow up knowing his father, she interrupted. It means he'll learn strength and courage and honor from a man who embodies all 3. It means I'll spend my life with someone who sees me as more than just a burden to be endured. Ayanaka caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. I love you, he said simply. I have loved you since the moment you took my hand beside that overturned wagon, trusting a stranger when you had every reason to fear. Then don't send me away, she pleaded. Let us face whatever comes together. He was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words against the danger that pursued them. Finally, he nodded. Together then. But we leave tomorrow night, before the soldiers can close their trap. As if he understood the gravity of the decision. Dakota chose that moment to wake, his blue eyes bright and alert in the moonlight. When he saw Ayanaki's face above him, he gurgled happily and reached out with one tiny fist. He knows you're his father, Cordelia said softly, watching the wonder spread across Ayanaki's features as he gently took the baby's hand. And I know that I would die before I let anything happen to either of you, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. The escape from the canyon happened in the deep hours before dawn, when darkness still wrapped the desert like a protective blanket. Cordelia moved through the abandoned Apache camp like a ghost, Dakota strapped securely to her chest in a traditional cradleboard that one of the women had given her as a parting gift. Behind them, the wickiup stood empty, their former inhabitants scattered to the 4 winds by the ancient survival strategy of their people. The soldiers will find nothing but smoke and memories, Ayanaka had explained as they prepared to leave. But they will search every canyon, every waterhole, every place we have ever called home. Now, as they rode single file through a narrow pass that seemed to exist between 2 worlds, Cordelia understood the true meaning of his words. They were not simply running from the cavalry, they were stepping outside the boundaries of both Apache and white civilization, into a place where only love and determination could sustain them. Ayanake led them through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate in daylight, much less in darkness. Ancient deer trails wound between towering rock formations that had stood since the world was young, paths known only to those who carried the old knowledge in their bones. Behind them rode Nayeli and her grandson Joaquin, the only others from the band who had chosen exile over surrender. "There," Ayanaka said as the sun crested the eastern peaks, pointing toward a hidden valley that opened like a secret between the mountains. "Our new home." The valley was smaller than their previous camp but more defensible, with only one narrow entrance and clear sight lines in all directions. A spring bubbled up from the rocks at its center, feeding a small stream that disappeared underground again at the valley's far end. Ancient petroglyphs covered the canyon walls, spirals, and handprints, and hunting scenes that spoke of people who had found sanctuary here long before the Apache, long before the Spanish, long before the Americans. The old ones knew, Nayeli observed, running her weathered fingers over a petroglyph depicting a woman holding a child. This has always been a place of refuge. They spent the first weeks establishing their new life with the methodical precision of people who understood that survival depended on preparation. Ayanaka and Joaquin built Wikiup's position to provide maximum defense while allowing quick escape routes. Cordelia learned to identify edible plants native to their high mountain environment and helped Nayeli establish a garden in the valley's most protected corner, but it was the evenings that sustained her spirit. Each night, as darkness settled over their hidden sanctuary, she and Ayanaka would sit together beside their small fire, Takota sleeping peacefully between them. Sometimes they spoke of practical things, where to cache emergency supplies, which routes offered the best escape options if they were discovered. Other times they shared stories of their different worlds, building bridges of understanding that spanned the gulf between their cultures. "Tell me about your vision quest again," she asked one night as autumn painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. Ayanaki's eyes grew distant, seeing something beyond the firelight. "I was younger then, barely 18 summers. I climbed to the highest peak I could find and fasted for 4 days and nights, waiting for the spirits to show me my path." He paused, his gaze moving to where Takota lay sleeping. "On the third night, I saw a woman with hair like winter sunlight and a child with eyes like the summer sky. The woman was not Apache, but she moved through our camp as if she belonged there, and the child played with Apache children as if they were his brothers." "Did you think the vision was false when your first wife died?" "I thought the spirits were cruel," he admitted. "I could not understand why they would show me happiness only to tear it away, but now." He reached across the space between them to touch her hand. "Now I think they were preparing me, teaching me to value what I had been given." Cordelia intertwined their fingers, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "The preacher who married me to Harold used to say that God's timing wasn't man's timing. I thought it was just something people said to make sense of tragedy. And now? Now I think maybe the spirits or God or whatever force guides our paths knew that neither of us was ready before. You needed to learn the depth of loss, and I needed to learn my own strength." She looked down at their sleeping son. "And Takota needed to wait for the right parents." As if responding to his name, the baby stirred and opened his eyes, which had indeed settled into the clear blue of a summer sky. When he saw their faces above him, he smiled, not the reflexive expression of an infant, but a real smile of recognition and joy. "He knows us," Ayanaka said with wonder, as if this simple miracle still amazed him. "He knows he's loved," Cordelia corrected, lifting Takota to hold him between them. "He knows he's wanted and protected and cherished." In the firelight, their small family created its own constellation of warmth and belonging, proof against all the darkness that surrounded them. 2 years later, the territorial governor's amnesty program brought an unexpected visitor to their hidden valley. Cordelia was teaching Dakota to walk among the wildflowers when she heard horses approaching through the narrow pass, but these riders came openly, without stealth, calling out greetings in both English and Apache. Father Miguel from the sand. Carlos' mission emerged into the valley like a figure from another world, his brown robes dust-covered but his eyes bright with purpose. Behind him rode Lieutenant Carson, not the hostile officer who had first pursued them, but a younger man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," Father Miguel called out, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who had spent too many hours in the saddle. "Or should I say Mrs. Ayanaka? I bring news from the territorial capital." Cordelia felt her heart skip, but Ayanaki's presence beside her provided steady reassurance. Their son toddled between them, his chubby legs still unsteady, but his determination absolute as he chased a butterfly through the grass. "Jake Morrison is dead," Lieutenant Carson announced without preamble. "Killed in a gunfight with Texas Rangers 6 months ago. Before he died, he confessed to using you as unwitting cover for his operations. The territorial government has officially cleared you of any wrongdoing." The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow. After 2 years of hiding, 2 years of looking. Over their shoulders, the threat that had driven them into exile was simply ... over. "There's more," Father Miguel continued, pulling a leather portfolio from his saddlebags. "The territorial governor has signed these papers." He held out a document, bearing an official seal. "Legal recognition of your marriage under territorial law and full citizenship rights for your son." Ayanaka took the papers with hands that trembled slightly. "Why?" he asked. "Why now?" "Because times are changing," Lieutenant Carson replied. "The Apache wars are ending. The territorial government wants peace, and they're willing to acknowledge that peace means accepting marriages like yours." He gestured toward their small but thriving settlement. "Besides, word has spread about what you've built here. A mixed community living in harmony. It's exactly what the politicians want to point to as proof that coexistence is possible." Cordelia felt tears stream down her face as the full impact of the news settled over her. "We can leave. We can go anywhere we want. Where would you want to go?" Ayanaka asked softly. She looked around their hidden valley, at the garden they had cultivated together, the petroglyphs that connected them to countless generations of people who had found refuge in this place, the spring that had sustained them through drought and plenty alike. Most of all, she looked at Dakota, who was now toddling toward them with a fistful of wildflowers, his face bright with the innocent joy of a child who had never known a world that didn't accept him exactly as he was. "Home," she said simply. "I want to stay home." Ayanaki's smile was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "Then we stay. But now we stay by choice, not necessity." Father Miguel cleared his throat. "There is one more thing. The territorial government is offering a substantial reward for information about other mixed families who might benefit from the amnesty program. Your valley could become a sanctuary for others like yourselves, a place where Apache and White can build a future together." Over the following months, their hidden sanctuary gradually transformed into something unprecedented in the territory's history. Other mixed couples found their way to the valley, drawn by stories of a place where love mattered more than blood quantum or skin color. Naili became the valley's unofficial grandmother, teaching traditional skills to children of every heritage. While Cordelia established a school that combined Apache oral traditions with European literacy, Ayanaka served as the valley's liaison with the outside world, his natural diplomacy and proven integrity making him a respected voice in territorial politics. When officials came to visit, and they came often, as the valley became a symbol of successful integration, they found a thriving community that challenged every assumption about what was possible between their peoples. But it was the children who proved the valley's greatest success. Dakota grew up bilingual and bicultural, equally at home tracking deer through the mountains with his Apache uncle Joaquin and reading adventure stories by lamplight with his mother. His playmates included Apache, Mexican, and white children. And to them, the differences that had once meant war were simply interesting variations in the human family. On a warm spring evening 5 years after their arrival in the valley, Cordelia sat outside their expanded home, watching Dakota teach. His baby sister, 3-year-old Luna, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, how to braid grass into simple baskets. Ayanaka emerged from the council lodge, where he had been meeting with representatives from 3 territorial counties who wanted to establish similar communities. They're offering to make the valley an official territorial preserve, he reported, settling beside her on the bench he had carved from a fallen cottonwood. Complete protection for all residents, regardless of heritage. And what did you tell them? I told them I needed to discuss it with my wife, he said with a smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. Cordelia leaned against his shoulder, watching their children play in the golden light of the setting sun. Around them, the valley hummed with the quiet activity of families preparing for evening meals. Children being called in from play, couples walking together along the stream that had given them all life. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had gone to California like I originally planned? She asked. Ayanaka was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. I think the spirits would have found another way to bring us together. Some loves are written in the stars. They find a way to manifest regardless of the obstacles. Even if I had been too afraid to trust an Apache warrior who offered his name to a pregnant stranger? Especially then, he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Fear makes the choice to love even more powerful. As if summoned by their parents' closeness, both children abandoned their basket-weaving lesson and climbed onto the bench between them. Dakota, now 7 and full of questions about everything, looked up at his father with serious blue eyes. Papa, will you tell us the story again? About how you and Mama met? Ayanaka exchanged a glance with Cordelia over their children's heads, and she saw her own contentment reflected in his dark eyes. Once upon a time, he began, there was a woman who thought she had to face the world alone. She didn't know that sometimes the greatest strength comes from learning to trust someone else's strength alongside your own. As his voice wove the familiar tale into the desert evening, Cordelia closed her eyes and marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had set out for California as a desperate woman with no choices, and instead found herself building a new world in a hidden valley where love had indeed proved stronger than fear, and where the future stretched ahead bright with infinite possibility. The story continued around them, not just their story, but the larger story of a territory learning that its strength lay not in division but in the courage of people willing to build bridges across every boundary that had once seemed insurmountable. And at the heart of it all was the simple truth that Ayanaka had offered her. That first day in the desert, sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from the radical act of offering your name and your heart to someone who needs both.